Thank you, Senator Smith. We'll move to question time. Senator McGrath.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Australians are paying record prices for energy, for fuel, for groceries. Everywhere they turn, they are paying more. And in the middle of all of this, the government is proposing to spend hundreds of millions of dollars creating over 40 new politicians and increasing the size of parliament. Minister, who is asking for this, the Australian people or the Australian Labor Party?
Thank you, Senator McGrath. Order, order, order. Senator Wong.
Well, can I say as a general proposition that the Australian Labor Party is pretty happy with the size and composition of the current parliament, and I think that would be the approach we would take. But I am aware. I think it's Senator Senator Canavan who was keen, or the National Party who was keen on increasing the size of the parliament. But I think that's a matter for them.
Thank you, Minister. Senator McGrath, first supplementary.
PBO costings show that expanding parliament by over 40 politicians will cost taxpayers more than $600 million. Minister, how can the government justify spending more than $600 million on more politicians when Australians cannot afford to fill their cars?
Minister Wong.
Again, I would say that we on this side are happy with the current size and composition of the parliament. It is. I would just.
Pulling up the drawbridge.
Order.
If I may.
See you, Matt. See you, Matt. Lots of diversity on that Senate ticket, James.
Order across the chamber. Order. Order across the chamber. Order. Senator Farrell. Senator Farrell, come to order. So I don't think that's the first time I've ever called you to order. Order. Minister Wong.
Thank you. It is, of course, standing practice for the— oh, boy. I'll just wait.
Order across the chamber. Order across the chamber. Order. I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting. Order. Order. Minister Wong.
It is, of course, standard practice that the multi-party JSCEM undertake a review until after every election to consider the what we can learn from those elections and the matters that affect our democracy. It's a routine process that is still underway. I don't believe it's even tabled an interim report, so I think you're jumping the gun a bit. And if I may, while I'm on my feet, congratulate you for taking the top of the Senate ticket, Senator McGrath. But I do think, saying to people, we would say to you that you probably have some self-interest, in not wanting the parliament changed.
Order! Order! This is question time, not yelling across the chamber time. Senator McGrath, second supplementary.
Minister, no party took this to the last election. No voter was consulted. No Australian asked for this. Will the government rule out expanding the size of parliament, yes or no?
Thank you, Senator McGrath. Minister Wong.
Well, again, we are happy on this side of the chamber with the size and the composition of the parliament. I would say to you, Senator, though, it does seem slightly odd that I have had lectures from you about being out of touch, but in the middle of a fuel crisis, a conflict in the Middle East and the largest global shock to energy markets in Australian history, you want to talk about yourself.
Minister, please resume your seat. Order. Order. Senators on my right. Senator McGrath.
Point of order. I seek to table the costings from the PBO showing it's going to cost $600 million of taxpayers.
Senator McGrath, resume your seat. Senator McGrath. Senator McGrath. Order. Minister Wong, had you concluded your answer?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Senator Dowling.
Yeah.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. The conflict in the Middle East is disrupting global supply chains, impacting the ability to purchase fuel on the global market. This is driving up fuel prices and compounding cost of living pressures. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering timely and meaningful relief to households and businesses, and how will the government's decision to temporarily lower the fuel excise deliver further relief?
Thank you, Senator Dowling. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, and I thank Senator Dowling for that question. And it is the question, I think, on the topic that is attracting a lot of attention from households right across Australia as they deal with the impacts, as Senator Dowling said, from the conflicts in the Middle East and the consequences they're having on the fuel markets. The Middle East conflict has caused real disruption, and Australians are feeling it at the Bowser and beyond. But we have worked hard, the Albanese government, to make sure that we are responding in a timely and coordinated way to deal with the consequences of that conflict. We have passed new laws to double the penalty for petrol companies that engage in price gouging, misleading conduct or cartel behaviour. We've released 20% of Australia's fuel reserves, targeted to ease pressure in regional markets and protect supply for critical users. We've temporarily adjusted petrol and diesel standards. We've engaged with international partners and suppliers to support continued shipments. And, of course, we've established the Fuel Supply Task Force to drive whole-of-government coordination and provided some financial counselling support for impacted farmers, because we know that pressure is hitting there hard. Yesterday, the government took further action, including cutting the fuel excise by half and reducing the heavy vehicle road user charge to zero for 3 months. We've also introduced bills to ensure the government can respond quickly to any urgent and unforeseen fuel supply challenges that may arise. The National Cabinet yesterday agreed to the National Fuel Security Plan, which has 4 clear areas. The first, plan and prepare. The second, keep Australia moving, which is the stage we're currently at. The third stage, taking targeted action, and the fourth, protecting critical services for all Australians. So we are looking at how we can support industry, business, households, and make sure there's a continued coordinated response across all governments across Australia as we deal with the impacts of the conflict from the Middle East.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Dowling, first supplementary.
The government is clear that fuel retailers must not use global uncertainty to increase their margins at Australians' expense. How is the government protecting consumers and motorists and ensuring fair pricing at the Bowser?
Thank you, Senator Dowling. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, and I thank Senator Dowling for that question. It's an important one. The Treasurer has tasked the ACCC to ramp up fuel price monitoring, reporting weekly with a focus on unusual price spikes. We've also empowered the ACCC by doubling penalties for false and misleading conduct and cartel behaviour, with legislation that passed last week. The ACCC itself has been very clear about targeting misconduct in the fuel sector, and they've also announced they're investigating major fuel companies over allegations of market misconduct. And indeed, last month, before the crisis began, they secured a $16 million fine against Mobil for making false or misleading representations around fuel. And the ACCC also brought in the fuel companies into an urgent meeting to explain their pricing conduct. Now, this focus is really important and will continue to make sure that the decisions we've taken will flow on to motorists when they go and fill up their car once that excise comes off.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Dowling, second supplementary.
In a volatile global environment, Australians need confidence in the security and reliability of our fuel supply. What is the government doing to secure Australia's fuel supply and strengthen reliability amid ongoing global uncertainty?
Thank you, Senator Dowling. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I also thank Senator Dowling for that question, because supply has been a priority, and focusing on supply has been a priority for the Albanese government since this conflict began. And indeed, there's legislation that will come to this place later today to ensure that Export Finance Australia can help industry source additional cargoes overseas, and it will do that by making sure there are new powers to keep fuel flowing for Australians by underwriting the purchase of fuel by the private sector. Already there are discussions with local and international fuel suppliers to help firm up and source new cargoes to ensure we're getting the fuel we need when it's needed and where it's needed. And it will mean in cases where it would be cost prohibitive for private suppliers to source on commercial terms, the government will provide that additional support. It won't subsidise fuel that importers have already contracted to supply, but it will give suppliers confidence to secure additional and discretionary cargoes which will be used to service uncontracted demand, including in regional and independent fuel suppliers.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Hume.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Yesterday, the Prime Minister followed the Coalition's lead and announced a temporary cut to the fuel excise. You're welcome. But unlike the Coalition, he couldn't point to a single dollar in savings to pay for it. The Reserve Bank has been very clear. Australia's inflation problem is homegrown. Inflation is well above the target band, and increasing fuel costs will push it higher still. Minister, how much will this unfunded decision add to inflation? Or has the Prime Minister not even bothered to ask?
Just a moment, Senator Wong. Senator McKenzie, you interjected the whole time that Senator Hume was on her feet, and I found it very hard to hear her question. Questions need to be asked in silence, as do answers. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Hume for her question. And I can advise that the estimate — I was asked about inflation — that the Treasury estimates indicate that the excise cut could directly reduce headline inflation by around 0.5 percentage point through the year to the June quarter 2026. And I would just emphasise, obviously, that the reduction in the fuel excise that is being brought forward is temporary. In relation to how this is to be funded, I would note the boasting from the Shadow Finance Minister, who looked to increase debt and to increase deficits and to increase taxes, that theirs was a more responsible policy. I would make the point that the position of the Coalition in relation to what they proposed on excise was to make electricity bills more expensive, because in an ideological approach to energy policy, their proposal was to cut the home battery program. There are around 300,000 Australians, including households and small business, who have installed a cheaper home battery. This permanently reduces power bills. It delivers real and lasting cost of living relief for families, businesses, and benefits everyone by taking pressure off the electricity grid. So I'd make the point, Senator, through you, President, that the so-called offsets or savings that you describe, in fact, would ensure that more Australian households would have higher energy prices.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Hume, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, economists today have warned that the government's $2.6 billion fuel excise cuts will add to inflation by putting further pressure on interest rates, and will put further pressure on interest rates, I should say, because there's not a single dollar of savings that go alongside it. Is the Prime Minister aware that his version of this policy risks forcing the RBA to raise interest rates and keep them higher for longer? And if he is aware, why is he happy to let Australian mortgage holders pay the price for his failure to find savings in the budget?
Thank you, Senator Hume. Minister Wong.
Well, first, cost of living pressures have been a priority for this government since coming into government. And, of course, I don't need to remind the former Shadow Finance Minister that, in fact, the inflation challenge under the government of which she was a part was much, much higher. It is the case that that Australians are having to deal with higher inflation and interest rates, and we are very conscious of that, which is one of the reasons why cost of living measures have been such a priority for our government. And I would make the point that the former Shadow Finance Minister was part of a party that voted against a great many of the cost of living measures that the government put forward, including tax cuts. And it is quite remarkable, isn't it, to record for history a Liberal Party opposing tax cuts.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Hume, second supplementary.
Minister, Australians are being forced to make difficult choices every single day, including whether they can afford to take their Easter holiday to be with family and friends. Why is it always the case that Australians are being forced to make tough choices, but the Prime Minister refuses to make any, and only ever seems to make the inflation problem worse?
Thank you, Senator Hume. Minister Wong.
And why is it always the case that you oppose relief for Australian families? I mean, that's really the question that Australians were asking after the last election, when the economic team that now runs the Liberal Party, Mr Taylor and Senator Hume, went to an election with bigger deficits, more debt and higher taxes. And now have the temerity to come in and say, oh, by the way, you need some savings. I mean, it's quite well. This is just less than a year ago, Senator Cash, so you can't run away from the legacy of higher taxes, higher deficits and more debt as quickly as you. I know you want to put it into the rear vision mirror, but we all remember that this is the economic dream team that went to an election with higher taxes for the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Faruqi.
Thank you, President. My question is to Senator Wong. April 1st marks 2 years since the slaughter of Australian aid worker Zomi Frankham and her 6 colleagues by Israel. This was no tragic mistake. Their clearly marked aid convoy was struck 3 separate times until they were all killed. 2 years on, no one has been held accountable. Instead of justice, your government has offered platitudes and the inadequate Binskin report. Minister, you could have referred the matter to the ICC, pushed for an international investigation, demanded the release of evidence, imposed consequences, or insisted that those responsible be charged. At the very least, you could have honoured Zomi's family's wishes and demanded Israel give a public apology and compensation to recognise her life and support other aid workers. Beyond quietly raising the issue, what concrete action have you taken to secure justice for Zomi Frankham?
Thank you, Senator Faruqi. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. The death of Zomi Frankham and her 6 WCK World Central Kitchen colleagues should not have occurred. I've said that many times on behalf of our country, clearly to Israel and to the international community. Her tireless work to improve the lives of others should never have cost Zomi Frankham her life. We have made clear on more than one occasion, Senator, that our expectation that there should be transparency about Israel's ongoing investigation. We continue to press for full accountability, including any appropriate criminal charges. Most recently, the Prime Minister and I personally raised this matter with President Herzog, and we will continue to advocate on the family's behalf. At the UN General Assembly last year, in 2025, we honoured the life of Zomi Frankham by launching the Declaration for the Protection of Humanitarian Personnel, and I thank her brother for being with us on that day. Australia brought together more than 100 countries to commit to real protections for the people risking their lives to save others. This is about bringing the world together to protect people who risk everything to save innocent lives in war zones. I might make a comment. I don't know if I'm going to be asked this, but I saw some comments in relation to the audio recording. I want to make very clear with the chamber, we have made representations during and since the Binskin report to Israel on this matter on behalf of the family. We will continue to engage and consult Ms Frankham's family on their requests.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Faruqi, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Before I ask my next question, I want to give a shout-out to the brave humans, Jaden, Ethan, Zach and Annie, who are soon going to be joining the Global Samud Flotilla. Minister, when an Australian aid worker is murdered, and it is murder, it's not just death in a vacuum by a genocidal state, and your government refuses to take any meaningful action beyond representations, isn't your rhetoric about protecting aid workers completely hollow?
Thank you, Senator Faruqi. Minister Wong.
No.
Thank you, Minister Wong. Senator Faruqi, second supplementary.
Minister, aid workers put their lives on the line in the world's most dangerous places. They represent the very best in Australia. Why should any Australian aid worker trust that this government will protect them when after 2 years you have failed to deliver even the most basic accountability for the killing of one of our own?
Thank you, Senator Faruqi. Minister Wong.
The phrase "the aid workers are the best of us" is one I have used on a number of occasions, and it's one that I used when we, with 100 other countries, and I know you seek to dismiss that, but this is how you work for change. You build coalitions across countries. I know that's not your style, but that's not how you like to just yell at people. But we actually engage with other countries on this and with the ICRC. And I again say that the Geneva Conventions and international humanitarian law remain central to how Australia seeks to engage with the world and central to the world that Australia advocates for. In the shadow of the worst war the world has known, the international community came together to establish principles of humanitarian law, and we will always seek to defend them.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Order! 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 Senator Faruqi, you were heard in complete silence, and that respect needs to be shown to any minister that's answering questions. Senator Allman-Payne, not only are you out of order, I believe you're completely out of order because that is not your seat, according to my seating plan. Senator Ciccone.
Thanks a lot, President. My question today is to my good friend and Minister for Trade and Tourism, Senator Farrell. That's right, colleagues. Now, the Albanese government, President, is acting now to prepare and shield Australians from global fuel supply shocks. Now, last Saturday, the Prime Minister announced new fuel security powers to help keep fuel flowing into Australia. Minister, how do these new powers help secure fuel and keep our people, our economy and our nation moving forward?
Thank you, Senator Ciccone. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. And I do have some friends in this place. And I thank Senator Ciccone from the great state of Victoria for his question. The conflict on the other side of the world is having a real impact on Australians here at home. And the Albanese Labor government is acting now to shield Australians from the worst of it. Fuel is available on the international market, but it's becoming more expensive and riskier to secure commercially. That's why the government is stepping in to secure the additional fuel vital to the Australian economy. We're giving Export Finance Australia the financial tools that they need to support companies to get additional fuel shipments. They can provide insurance, derivatives, loans and other arrangements to make sure that those companies can go out and get the fuel cargoes for Australia and for Australians. This fuel security support from the government will not be business as usual. It will be for additional supplies, and this will ensure that we will have a wider range of tools available to respond to Australia's everyday needs. We will not wait for a crisis to deepen before we act. We will prepare for what may come, and we will act ahead of the curve. What we do today will shield Australians from the challenges of tomorrow. And the government is going further than fuel. Our strategic reserve will secure the supply of strategic materials that are absolutely vital to our growing economy. These include fuel, critical minerals and other goods that may be impacted by the current conflict in the Middle East.
Thank you, Senator Farrell. Before I come to you, Senator Ciccone, I draw to the attention of senators the presence in the gallery of former Senator Mark Upby. Senator Ciccone.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you, Minister, for that answer. As we know, no country is immune from the impacts of this conflict, but the government is acting decisively to ensure that Australia remains prepared and resilient. Minister, can you please outline on how the government's announcements on fuel security and fuel excise are helping to keep Australians on the road, supporting tourism that are reliant on businesses across our nation?
Thank you, Senator Ciccone. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Ciccone for his first supplementary question. The Albanese Labor government recognises that global uncertainty is placing pressure on households and businesses, but we're taking practical steps to ease that burden. Our measures on fuel security and temporary fuel excise relief will help families and ensure Australians can stay on the road. Importantly, as the Prime Minister has said, Australians should continue with their Easter plans. By having the fuel excise, we are lowering costs, we are strengthening supply, and we are supporting tourism operators, small businesses and regional communities that very much rely on holiday travel. These actions are about protecting jobs and ensuring Australians can continue to travel, connect and support local economies.
Thank you, Minister Farrell. Senator Ciccone, second supplementary.
Thanks again, President. Thank you, Minister. I'm sure many regional communities at the moment would be welcoming those people visiting over the Easter period. Australians have seen many petrol stations experiencing temporary shortages due to increased demand, and some businesses are struggling to get their products out of our country. What support is the government providing to these businesses, and what actions is the government taking to diversify trade and build supply chain resilience?
Thank you, Senator Ciccone. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Ciccone, for your second supplementary question. You know, I can imagine there will be a lot of people wanting to travel to the Clare Valley over this long Easter weekend. In early March, with the Trade Diversification Network established under our $50 million Accessing New Markets initiative, the network comprises 40 peak bodies from across Australian industry. Finding options for businesses relying on the Gulf is a priority for the network. In addition to whole-of-government efforts, the government, through Austrade, is providing market and logistical support and briefings for thousands of businesses, including on freight and shipping. Austrade is connecting exporters with importers, distributors and logistics providers, and providing advice on alternative markets for diversification. We're talking to Australian...
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. I inform the chamber that Senator Lambie has given her question to Senator David Pocock. Senator Pocock.
Thanks, President. My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Water, Senator Watt. Minister, the government has made some very welcome commitments to zero new extinctions and protecting 30% of land and seas by 2030. Yet, according to the Biodiversity Council, just 0.1% of our federal budget, or $474 million, was spent on nature protection in 2025. At the same time, on the most recent figures, $26 billion in subsidies are flowing to activities that actually harm biodiversity. Can the government meet its environmental commitments without a substantial increase in funding for nature, including the Saving Native Species program?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Watt.
Thanks, President, and thanks, Senator Pocock. It's nice to get a question about the environment, so thank you for asking the question. The Albanese government has committed substantial funding over the last 4 years towards the preservation of our native species. When we think about how Australia is thought about internationally, of course, very often when people think of Australia, they think of those unique native species that we have here, whether it be kangaroos, koalas, a range of reptiles, mammals, fish, etc. It's not only for that reason, of course, that we believe in supporting the preservation and recovery of these species, and it's exactly why we went to the 2022 election with a new funding program around saving native species. I've actually had the privilege of meeting some of the people who've played a really big role in captive breeding programs and other programs that we've been funding to aid the recovery of critically endangered species. It wasn't that long ago I was at Melbourne Zoo, for example, seeing the good work around the recovery of the Lord Howe Island stick insect and the Victorian grassland earless dragon, just to name a couple of species whose recovery is being supported through the funding provided by our government. Now, we are, of course, at that point in the budget cycle where a range of groups are making a range of asks regarding funding for existing and new programs. I think this week alone I've had about 7 different groups in my office asking for different funding for different kind of programs, and we'll weigh all of those requests up as we can make these sorts of considerations during the budget. But whether it be through that program or, of course, the historic environmental law reforms that this parliament passed last year, the Albanese government's record in protecting our native species is second to none.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Pocock, first supplementary.
And, thank you, Minister. Minister, we're hearing that the Saving Native Species program faces a funding cliff. I've been hearing from on-the-ground conservation organisations saying that they're already letting go staff because their funding comes to an end. Given how critical this on-the-ground work is to the government's goals when it comes to biodiversity, can the government provide these organisations with some certainty that the Saving Native Species program will continue to be funded?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Watt.
Thanks, Senator Pocock, and I suspect the very same groups who are speaking to you about this program are the same groups who have spoken to me about it, and indeed to the Minister for Finance as well, and the Treasurer about the importance of this program. So, as I say, we are at that point in the budget cycle where all of these things are being considered. It is the case that the Saving Native Species program was funded for 4 years after our election 2022. That means that the funding for the current program expires on the 30th of June this year, and of course that, along with a range of other measures, will be considered by the government as we finalise this year's budget.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Pocock, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, as I said, organisations are having to let go staff because of that funding cliff. Does the government believe that 0.1% of the federal budget is enough, given we're a mega-diverse country and a world leader in extinction?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Watt.
Thanks, Senator Pocock. Well, I haven't verified that figure, and I'd want to make sure that it does truly reflect the broad range of funding programs that exist, not just in my department, but a range of other departments of this government that go towards protecting biodiversity. In addition to those funding programs, as I've mentioned, we've reformed our environmental laws. We've put in place targets around protecting 30% of I'm not sure I'd be talking about.
Order.
Well, I'm not sure, Senator Henderson, if you really want to talk about extinct species. This government has laws, has policies, has funding programs in place towards the preservation and restoration of biodiversity, and I'm sure that a range of those programs will exist post-budget.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Pocock. Next question.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Industry and Innovation and the Minister for Science, Senator Ayres. Minister, I'm keen to understand how the voluntary national expectations that you released last week around data centres will be enforced and big multinational tech companies held to account for complying with them, given that when it came to the under-16 ban on social media, the Parliament had to pass legislation. It seems to me that when it comes to data centres, we have some expectations on a website. How will this be enforced?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Ayres.
Thank you, President, and thanks, Senator Pocock, for that question, which really goes to not just the announcement that I and the Assistant Minister, Dr Charlton, made the other day, but to the regulatory framework and investment from large proponents for data centres in Australia. My starting proposition and the government's starting proposition on this is that we want to see not just investment here in Australia, but investment that delivers for Australia. That does mean engaging with and making sure that we capture the opportunities of artificial intelligence for the Australian economy, not just in terms of data centres and digital infrastructure, but also the rest of the technological stack and the opportunities for Australian businesses and households. We released the National Artificial Intelligence Plan some months ago, and we indicated to the community that we would that we would announce the investment principles, which we call the expectations a few weeks ago. We did that. They go to prioritising our national interest, supporting energy investment, water sustainability, investing in skills and jobs, and strengthening research, innovation and local capability. Of course, the compliance rubber hits the road in the states, so the engagement with the states on their planning approvals is fundamental to us achieving our objectives here, particularly in terms of electricity. What this plan sets out very clearly is additional net electricity investment in terms of power purchasing agreements that provide for additional electricity in the system.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Pocock, first supplementary.
So, Minister, just to clarify, you're saying that the states will enforce your expectations, that there is no federal mechanism to enforce the expectations? I'm concerned about that because Aussies also expect things like a return on our gas, but don't get it. How are you actually going to enforce them?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Ayres.
Thanks, President. The enforcement proposal is simple. These companies are seeking the federal government's support. Proposals that align with those expectations will receive the support of the federal government. Proposals that don't align will not receive the support of the federal government. The expectations will work alongside existing state and territory legislation, where the majority, as I started to say in the response to the first question, the majority of planning approvals. And so that will require the states and territories meeting with the plan and adopting those principles themselves. And the discussions that we've had with the states and territories as we consulted with them about this and what they've had to say publicly about this gives me a lot of confidence that the states, there will not be a race to the bottom amongst the states and territories, that they are backing those principles and backing those expectations.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Pocock, second supplementary.
Well, Minister, I think Australians don't have much faith in big tech companies at all. These are companies that are happy to screw people for profits. So I'm interested, if a proposal aligns, how do you ensure that the proposal then meets its commitments around water, around energy, around jobs? It's all well and good to say, yeah, we'll do that, but how are you actually going to ensure that these companies are actually meeting what they say they're going to do?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Ayres.
Well, we'll work with states and territories and market bodies to embed those expectations into, in particular, planning approval frameworks, so that Australians can have confidence that a data centre that consumes a certain amount of electricity will underwrite power purchasing agreements that deliver additional electricity to what they consume, that there will be real and practical benefits for Australian companies, particularly in terms of research and development, building our own tech sector. This technology is important for Australia's competitiveness. It is important for the health of Australians. It's important for our strategic position in the region. And I accept absolutely, the reason that the government has introduced the Artificial Intelligence Safety Institute, the reason that we have announced these expectations and will embed them with the states, is to make sure that artificial intelligence investments deliver for Australians.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Immigration and Citizenship, Senator Watt. Minister, last November I asked you about the country of origin of refugees in your government's refugee visa program. Your response on notice stated, quote, "There were no visas granted to citizens of Nigeria or South Africa through the offshore refugee program." In my question, I pointed out the reason why we're not taking in Christian refugees is because your government is taking refugees almost exclusively from Muslim countries or communities. Minister, why is your government not offering refugee status to Christians currently being subject to persecution, violence and murder in Nigeria and South Africa, rather than taking the people who are propagating the culture of violence?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Watt.
Well, I'm always careful, Senator Roberts, to not concede that what you put forward as facts are actually facts. In particular, on matters relating to migration, because we know that you and your party seek to divide Australians based on the issue of migration. And in particular, if any evidence of that is needed, it's the conclusion of your question, which yet again seeks to tar all Muslim Australians and Muslim migrants with the actions of a small minority who do the wrong thing. You know, we know it wasn't that long ago that your party leader, Senator Hanson, effectively said that there was no such thing as a good Muslim, a statement that we utterly reject, and in fact Senator Whitten rejected, to his credit.
Minister Watt, please resume your seat. Senator Roberts.
Point of order. That's not accurate. She did not say that. That was
Senator
a media beat-up.
Senator Roberts. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Roberts, for sitting down when I requested it. Minister Watt, please continue.
Well, Senator Hanson's comments on Muslims were so outrageous that Barnaby Joyce distanced himself from them, that Senator Whitten distanced himself from them. I don't recall you distancing yourself from those comments, Senator Roberts. And that's a matter for you to determine how you feel about those statements.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Roberts.
Point of order. I just did distance myself because the comments weren't accurate.
Thank you, Senator Roberts. It's not a point of order. It's a debating point. Minister Watt, have you concluded your answer?
So what I've said repeatedly in answer to questions from One Nation on the issue of migration in this chamber is that the Albanese government proudly has a policy of not discriminating against migrants based on their religion or other personal attributes. We will always consider the merits of every migration application. Each and every day we reject applicants who are seeking to move to Australia and migrate to Australia on the basis of character checks and other reasons, but we don't have a blanket rule of stopping all people from a certain faith in the way that One Nation seeks us to do.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Roberts, first supplementary.
Thank you. Minister, the Syrian Islamic regime of President Abu Muhammad al-Jalani is conducting a slaughter of Christians and Alawites in Syria to turn Syria into a caliphate. The videos are all over social media, and yes, we have checked them and they've been authenticated. Minister, will you reduce...
Order. Order.
Will you reduce your Islamic refugee intake and at least balance it with Nigerian and Syrian Christian and Syrian Alawite refugees before they too are killed at the hands of Islamists?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. The time for asking has expired. Minister Watt.
Well, again, Senator Roberts, to your deep shame, you are equating every Muslim who seeks to move to Australia with the actions of what sounds like a reprehensible organisation, and that is not a position that we accept. Well, our position is that anyone who seeks to get a visa to migrate to Australia should be assessed to ensure their character, that they are of good character, that they don't present a security risk to Australians wherever they're from and whatever their faith is. Now, Senator Roberts, I might need to remind you that the comments of your leader, Senator Hanson, were that, well, there's good Muslims out there. She was asked whether there's good Muslims out there, and she said, how can you tell me there are good Muslims? So if that's the kind of language and rhetoric that you think is going to help bring this country together, then that's on you.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Roberts, second supplementary.
Minister, in your written reply dated 4th of November, you twice refer to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and admit that it informs and manages, quote, your resettlement intake. Why is your immigration program risking the safety and security of everyday Australians?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Watt.
Well, it's not. And, Senator Roberts, I know you and your party have sought to profit politically from the awful tragedy we saw at Bondi just before Christmas, and it's worth remembering that one of the people involved in those attacks migrated to Australia during the Howard government's period in office, and the other of those people was born in Australia. But let's just ignore the facts for a minute, Senator Roberts. That's the way you operate. The way this government operates is that we make decisions about individual applicants based on their character, based on whether they're going to make a positive contribution to Australia and whether they represent a security risk to Australia. We do not have the kind of approach that you are encouraging us to take, and we will always proudly stand up for Australian values in terms of who is admitted to this country.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Whittaker.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Senator Ayres. The price of fuel and fertiliser for regional communities and farmers is rising due to the conflict in the Middle East, and in some areas there are shortages. In response, a key focus for the Albanese Labor government is ensuring Australia's supply of fuel and fertiliser is secure and that supplies get to where they are needed. What is the government doing to protect regional communities and businesses from energy and supply chain shocks?
Thank you, Senator Whittaker. Minister Ayres.
President, and thank you to Senator Whittaker for that question. The first thing I should say, particularly for regional communities, is that yesterday, on top of a series of other measures that have been undertaken over the last 3 or 4 weeks, the Albanese government halved fuel excise. In terms of regional communities, where more fuel is used, obviously, but also households have disproportionately lower incomes than in the big cities. This has a disproportionately positive effect, and we are, on this side, very proud of that decision. Secondly, we've cut the heavy vehicle road user charge to 0 for 3 months and will delay the planned increase in that charge by an additional 6 months. Logistics for regional communities make up a larger proportion of goods prices. So that will have a downward effect on what's happening in terms of goods prices in country communities where they are facing, because of increases in the cost of fuel, sharper increases than city communities are facing. On fertilisers, our new EFA powers will enable suppliers to meet uncontracted demand, keeping the domestic fertiliser market well supplied and flexible and well supplied as we can make it to meet farmers' changing needs. These are challenging times for Australian agriculture. On the back of a series of record years in terms of production broadly in Australian agriculture, we are determined to do what we can as a government, working with the states and territories, to support our farming communities, particularly as we approach—
Thank you, Minister. Senator Whittaker, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister, for that answer. The new underwriting powers for Export Finance Australia will enable suppliers to secure additional shipments of fuel and fertiliser. Why are the new powers for Export Finance Australia particularly important for protecting regional communities?
Right. Minister Ayres.
Well, thank you very much. In particular in relation to fertiliser, but also more broadly in relation to fuels, this is a very important set of actions for regional communities. We are not here undercutting the domestic market. What the government is doing is de-risking additional fertiliser shipments for private suppliers that are otherwise, in their judgment, and the feedback we've got from industry very clearly, is in their judgment it is sometimes too risky to order without firm contracts, and it will keep the fertiliser market more flexible and mean that Australian procurers overseas are in the front of the queue instead of the back of the queue, because they have that support from Export Finance Australia and from the Australian government. It puts Australian suppliers and Australian farmers in a stronger competitive position.
Has expired. Senator Whittaker, second supplementary.
The Albanese Labor government has prioritised strengthening Australia's sovereign capability. What has the government done to make sure Australian supply chains are more resilient?
Minister.
Well, if I can take one example, the intervention by the Albanese government, jointly with the Crisafulli government in Queensland, to support the copper smelter operations in Mount Isa, means that Australia's only domestic manufacturer of monoammonium phosphate and diammonium phosphate is open today. And despite those opposite saying they would not have done that intervention and criticising it uphill and down dale, The reason that we have domestic fertiliser production in Australia is for two reasons. One, our Future Made in Australia agenda is making Australia stronger and supporting businesses like that specific business. And number two, the decision by the government to announce a gas reservation strategy supported the ongoing operations of that business.
Expired. Senator Patterson.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. On Saturday, at a press conference in Sydney, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "I was with the head of Bunnings just last weekend, had a discussion with him. They've run out of jerry cans. That's not sensible. People need to act responsibly at this time." Is the Prime Minister correct that Bunnings has run out of jerry cans?
Minister Wong.
This is the question on the economy. I am not across Bunnings inventory, but I can say to you, that
Order.
Please approach the issue seriously.
Order.
But I am across why.
Order. Order. I do need to hear the minister's response. Minister Wong, please continue. Minister Wong.
But I am across the circumstances which led Australians, a number of Australians, to buy jerry cans and to fuel up, and that is, of course, the conflict in the Middle East. And I know the opposition appear to not want to treat this today seriously, but there is a serious question about how we deal with the largest global shock to energy markets since the 1970s, and that is a serious economic and policy question, and it is an important issue for public figures to manage responsibly.
Order.
And what I'd say to the opposition is we laid out yesterday a very clear plan that responded to the growing challenges in global energy markets. We have obviously been acting prior to this. You've seen the release of 20% of the minimum stockholding obligations. You've seen changes to the fuel regulations to enable more fuel produced in Australia to be used here. You've seen the way in which the government has sought to deal with this issue. And then on Saturday you saw the Prime Minister and Minister Bowen make a very important announcement, which Senator Farrell was also engaged in, which is about more supply, and that is to use Export Finance Australia to de-risk some of the purchases on the private market to increase supply. Now, these are serious matters involving serious consideration.
Expired. Senator Patterson, first supplementary.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Minister, for that entirely non-responsive answer. A spokesman for Bunnings told Samantha Maiden from news.com.au yesterday, and I quote, "Bunnings has not run out of jerry cans." As the Prime Minister said himself, people need to act responsibly at this time. How is it responsible to add to Australians' anxiety with baseless misinformation like this?
Order. I'm waiting for order. Order. Minister Wong.
Conflict in the Middle East involving, I think it's around 12 countries. Iran holding the Strait of Hormuz hostage. 20% of the global supply of oil affected. 70% of the oil coming to our region. The largest shock in energy markets since the 1970s, and they won an inventory question. I mean, this says something about you are not serious. You are not a serious opposition. You start this question time with a question about the parliament because you can't think of something to ask about fuel, and now you are asking about inventory, not about the global energy problems, not about the Iran war, but now about inventory. It says something about your lack of standing,
thank you,
Senator
Minister.
Patterson.
Order. Order. Order across the chamber. Order. That was a truly disgraceful response. When the minister was on her feet— no, on my left. They're interjections. They're interjections. Order. Order. You may joke to and from and across the chamber. You don't joke with me. That was a disorderly conduct by those on my left when the minister was responding, and you will come to order. I'm not in a yelling competition with the whole of the opposition. Senator Patterson, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. How can the Australian people trust anything the Prime Minister says about the fuel crisis when the government first denied there was a crisis, then dragged their feet to act, and now can't even get basic facts right?
Thank you, Senator Patterson. Minister Wong. Minister Wong.
How can
order? Senator Watt, come to order. Minister Wong, please continue.
So, how can the Australian people trust an opposition who so clearly is not up to the job? Who so clearly is not up to the job? How can the Australian people trust an opposition when you've got the leader and Mr Hastie— I'm sorry, what is his portfolio? Prime Minister. Industry, defence, contradicting each other on policy quite openly. And leading to Mr Tallis saying, I'm going to counsel him, and then Mr Hastie saying, well, actually, it was more like a chat between
Minister
mates.
Wong, please resume your seat. Senator Patterson.
President, on direct relevance, I'm not sure what the minister's observations
Senator
about people
Patterson.
in the other House have to do with the Prime Minister
Senator
getting basic
Patterson,
facts wrong.
I have reminded the chamber over and over there is no need to have an explanation. You've called a point of order. I'll remind the minister of the question. Minister Wong.
Well, I'm asked about what the Australian people can trust, and I am simply saying, President, that those opposite have demonstrated both recently but also in the election, as I said, the party of higher taxes, higher deficits and more debt, that they are not to be trusted. So if we want to talk about trust, I think we know which party is serious.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Walker.
My question is to the Minister for Environment and Water, Minister Watt. Since 2022, the Albanese Labor government has been focused on fixing the decade of coalition neglect, dealing with the challenges of the present and delivering on our promises to build Australia's future. Increasing the supply of new homes is a challenge the government is tackling head-on through the establishment of a housing strike team to speed up project approvals. Can the minister update the Senate on the progress of the strike team, including how many new homes have been approved since its establishment?
Thank you, Senator Walker. Minister Watt.
Thanks, President, and thanks, Senator Walker, who I know is a fierce advocate of the needs of younger Australians when it comes to housing. The Albanese Labor government is taking decisive action to cut through the red tape and delays in approvals that have held up the construction of more homes. After a decade of delay under the coalition, where we saw no investment in social and affordable housing, we're speeding up approvals to build homes more quickly. For too many builders in Australia, it takes longer to get approval for a home than it does to build one, and this has held back housing supply and made it harder for ordinary Australians to get into a home of their own. Our reforms to the EPBC Act will speed up environmental assessments and approvals while strengthening environmental protections. But we're not waiting for those reforms to commence. We're taking action now. Last year, we established a new housing strike team within my department to accelerate assessment of the more than 26,000 homes that were with the department for assessment. Since the announcement of the housing strike team in late August 2025, tens of thousands of new homes have been approved by the Albanese government. Andrew, Senator Bragg, we're always happy to answer a question about housing and the environment, but you just don't seem to make the cut. So we'll take the questions and let you know. In total, the government has given 26 housing projects the green light since that time, supporting 19,889 new homes. The projects include 15 metropolitan developments, supporting 16,210 new homes, and 11 regional developments supporting 3,679 new homes. Most recently, approval was given to our new housing development in Thurgoona, in an electorate that we know quite a few people over there have got an interest in. It's the electorate of Farrer. and that development will include 425 homes, roads and infrastructure and a school. We're on track to deliver on our goal from the Economic Roundtable of assessing 26,000 new homes by July this year.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Walker, first supplementary.
The Albanese government's housing strike team is paving the way for the development of thousands of new homes for Australian families. How is the government ensuring the environment is being protected while still approving the homes Australians need?
Thank you, Senator Walker. Minister Watt.
Thanks, Senator Walker. Well, in delivering new homes, the Albanese government is getting the balance right by also ensuring that Australia's spectacular natural environment is protected. The approval for the development I mentioned in the electorate of Farrer earlier includes targeted conditions to protect listed threatened species. The conditions include strict clearance limits and a management plan to create, enhance and protect habitat for the endangered Sloane's froglet and critically endangered regent honeyeater.
Order.
The poor old gnats who've already conceded defeat in the electorate of Farrer because they didn't deliver any new homes, unlike the Albanese government. Our approach to speeding up environmental approvals stands to contrast to what we saw in the Coalition's decade of housing roadblocks. At one point during the Coalition's term of government, they provided no funding whatsoever for housing approvals in the Environment Department, and their neglect meant that not a single approval was made on time. So dire was the situation when we came to government. There were nearly 100 housing projects sitting unapproved by the Coalition.
Senator Walker, second supplementary.
Last year, the Albanese Labor government passed once-in-a-generation reforms to Australia's environmental laws. How will these changes smooth the approval pathways so that housing projects can be approved even faster than is currently occurring, while still ensuring strong environmental protections?
Thank you, Senator Waters. Minister Watt.
Thanks, Senator Walker. And I understand why the Nationals get a bit toey when we talk about electorates like Farrer, because their new position in Australian politics has to become a preference distributor. A preference distributor either to the Liberal Party or the One Nation Party. That's how irrelevant the National Party has become.
Please resume your seat. Order! Senator Watt does not need the yelling that's going on. You are to listen in silence. Minister Watt, please continue.
Thank you for your protection, President. The housing approvals process is only going to get faster under the Albanese government, as well as getting simpler and more reliable from here, with the rollout of our landmark national environmental laws well underway. We'll see faster approvals via new streamlined approval pathways, better and more enduring bilateral agreements between federal and state governments, and improved strategic assessments and bioregional planning. What a far cry from the situation we inherited from the Coalition when we came to office, when there were nearly 100 housing projects sitting unapproved, not a single dollar provided to the Environment Department for environmental approvals for housing. Since then, we've approved 79 housing projects totalling 62,000 homes, and there are more to come under the Albanese Labor government.
Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. I ask that further questions be placed on notice.
Thank you.